You've been listening to the True Idaho News Podcast. Unfiltered news and opinion for the citizens of Idaho. Get more true news by visiting trueidahonews.com. If you'd like to support this podcast, visit trueidahonews.com/support. Thanks for listening.
Good morning, everybody. Shane Klass here with True Idaho News, and we are live with Senator Christy Zito. How are you doing this morning, Christy?
I am good. How are you? And good morning, everybody.
Yeah,
beautiful day to be alive.
Oh, it is. We are finally, I think, out of the cold weather, and now we get to go to the blistering heat season of Idaho.
Right. It's 40 degrees one day and 110 the next. Exactly.
So
but we love it.
Yeah, we do. It's, I have lived in quite a few places around the nation, and I used to call it when I was a kid, growing up in Twin Falls, everybody's goal in life is to get out of Twin Falls. And so I moved away, but I called it the black hole that kept sucking me back in. But now I can't imagine anywhere better to live. I'm here.
Well, and I think when we're growing up, most people are like that. I grew up in northern Utah, and I remember thinking, I can't wait to blow this place, but I lived there 42 more years before I came here. So I think that's part of our youthful arrogance, that maybe the grass is a little greener on the other side, or, maybe the people are a little different. And so I had someone tell me once, an old guy that would just come to our fruit stand and drove truck for us and stuff. And they were like grandparents to my kids. And we were talking about moving up here, and the conversation went into, well, I wonder how the people are up there. And he said, well, how are the people here where you live? And I said, well, they're great. I love it here. It's just wonderful. And he said, well, that's how the people will be there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So I thought that was wisdom.
That is wisdom. This isn't quite as wise of a statement. It's just the grass is always greener on the other side, but on this side, at least I know where I've been pooping.
That's a good point.
So, kind of digging in just a little bit, I did a little background check on you. Just kind of dug in a little bit before in preparation for the show.
Find anything bad?
No, actually, it was really interesting. I didn't know this, but you're a mother of 5 and a grandmother of 11.
Yes, I am very, very proudly the mother of 5 and the grandmother of 11. As far as I'm concerned, being a senator, being a legislator is an awesome thing. But my greatest contribution to society was being a mom. And I was blessed enough to be a stay-at-home mom, even though I worked every day on the farm.
Oh, that's
that made it so that I could take my kids with me. And then a lot of my kids' friends worked on the farm. So we were just like this big, happy family that would peel 5 pounds of potatoes every night for supper, because there were my kids and all the kids that worked for us and all the kids that hung out with those kids. And everybody was always welcome, always welcome. I just believe that the home is the foundation of a stable country.
And there's a lot of truth in that. I grew up farming. People didn't know that about me. Of course, it's nothing special in Twin Falls. A lot of us grew up doing that. We had the family farm, and then we sharecropped. We had it was my grandpa, my dad, and I, and one hired hand. And we farmed all of Grandpa's property, and then also had the cattle. And then we had 1, 2, 3 other farmers that we sharecropped for, and it was just us. So running out, setting siphon tubes, and that was before they had all of the big pivots. It was all done by hand with siphon tubes or gated pipe or dirt ditches, and just throwing in the tarp and letting it flood out into the corrugates. So it was.
That's how we farmed in Utah. I would rather start 1,000 2-inch siphon tubes than move 1 line of main line of hand line. I hate moving. I don't know whether it's because I'm short or what it is, but that is my least favorite job in the whole entire world, to move hand line.
You know, it's funny. One of you say you always had that opportunity in life, and some of us took it, and some of us passed it up. I was working at Radio Shack as a kid, and this guy came in to buy. It was back when Aptiva computers first came out. I don't know if anybody even knows what those are, but it was what Radio Shack was one of the first selling computers at the time. And this guy came in and bought one, and he walked out, turned around, and came right back in, and he handed me a business card. He says, "You know what?" He goes, "I think you need to come to work for me. I want you to consider something." And he handed me his card, said, "Give me a call." And he was selling the sprinklers. And
Oh, yes.
and I looked, I said, "Nobody's gonna buy those," and threw his card away.
You missed an opportunity there. Yes.
I did. Oh, that was a mess up. Oh, what, I'm clicking buttons over here. But anyway, this isn't about me. This is a little bit more about you. So how did farming shape your perspective as a legislator?
Well, I think it has a huge impact because I grew up in a farm family. I think I had the best of both worlds because my dad's side of the family were row crop farmers, and then my mother's side of the family were ranchers. So I got to grow up, riding and roping and working cattle and understanding how to work animals. And I know that sounds funny, and I didn't realize that there's an understanding there until my kids, who had always just been, we had always row crop farmed when my kids were growing up. Then one of my boys decided to get some cows, and they needed to gather them up so that we could vaccinate and doctor the calves. And so I just tell my kids, go down, in the river bottom and put those cows in that Powder River panel fence we set up down there. And they were gone about an hour, and they came back and they said, "There's no way you can put those cows in those panels." I'm like, yeah, I've done it all my life. Then it was a good lesson for me to understand that just because I understand something and it's natural to me, that doesn't mean it's natural to someone else.
Mm,
And I think in general, what growing up on a farm and understanding that and then living that life all my life, if I don't get up and go get it done, it's not going to get done. And if I don't get up and go get it done, my family's not going to eat.
yeah.
If I miss an irrigation turn, the crops won't grow, then there won't be any money. You're not going to make the mortgage payment, you're not going to have money for groceries, buy clothes, take care of your family. So I think that the one thing that a true family farm agricultural based growing up, more so, on family farms the way they were when you were growing up and stuff. Now, so many of them are corporate. It's a different thing.
Yeah.
Families aren't engaged in the everyday activities. Oh, some are. Some are. My one son that farms, they're like that. His kids are actively engaged. You learn that responsibility and you learn that accountability that if I don't get my job done, there are immediate consequences. And so I think that makes a big difference. I also think that you grow up with a compassion for the world around you and an understanding of just how big the world is and that it doesn't circle around you.
Mm.
And I think those are some of the things that I learned being engaged in it. Now, because I handled the business end of it also, we grew onions and I shipped onions all over the country, brokered onions into other countries and stuff. I also had to learn some business savvy that just because a person tells you they're going to do something or they tell you that they're going to pay you, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to do that. And so you have to learn how to navigate that and how to watch out for that. And when that does happen, how hard do you push and then where do you stop? Where do you just, cut bait and figure it's you're not going to get it, so you just move on. So there are a lot of lessons. People lessons. We had a fruit stand where people would come in. We sold corn, watermelons, potatoes, tomatoes, squash, peppers, onions, you name it, we probably grew it. Asparagus, raspberries. One time we planted peanuts. So I had a lot of contact with people, and having a place like that, a fruit stand like that, is a lot like being a bartender. So people would come in and they would stand at the counter, and I learned so much about people that sometimes I didn't want to know. And I got to hear people's political opinion. And I noticed it didn't take long for me to figure out that people love to come in and complain.
Mm.
Yeah, well, And these were the Bill Clinton years. Well, the president this and the president that, or the school board this, or the county commission that, or the water board this. And so finally, I'm standing there one day and I'm like, when did you run? Have you considered running? Do you go to the meetings? Do you hear what happens in the meetings? There was this one man that always complained about the water board, always complained about the canal company. I said, why don't you run? And I wasn't being mean to them.
Sure.
I was serious about why don't, if you're not happy about it, run or go to the meetings or engage. So those are some of the lessons that are, specific to the way I grew up and the way I was raised.
That's interesting. I had a pastor one time that made a good point, and it was the same thing. He wasn't being mean. He said, if there's something that you're complaining about, then perhaps that's God telling you that that's something that you would be good at managing in the church. And if you're not happy with how things are going in the daycare, serve in the daycare, and for two reasons. One, it's you have a heightened sense of awareness of what's going on there, so you would probably be good at fixing it. But number two, you might find out that you might find out what you don't know by working there. And once you get in on the inside, then you suddenly realize, oh, that's why they do it that way. Because if you try to go this way, it won't work. And it's a good experience.
To that.
There really is.
In fact, I did an op-ed for the Mountain Home newspaper here not too long ago because I've got a friend on the city council and I read some of, not that I did it for her, I didn't, but just in general, because you hear people, gripe about the legislature, gripe about the city council. When people are in office, it's like we elect them and then we want to pick on them because things don't go the way we think they should. And in that op-ed, social media, I'm not sure if it's helped us or hurt us. I'm not sure if it's been our friend or our enemy, because yes, it's good. We can get the information, we can get it out there. But also people have to understand that you have to use your power of discernment. Just because it's on Wikipedia doesn't mean it's true. Just because some chick from North Idaho screams it 75 times a day, that doesn't mean it's true. And so you have to use your power of discernment. And that's what I put in that letter to the editor, that if you're not happy with the direction that the city council's going and you question why these decisions are being made or question what the mayor's doing, show up to those meetings. Yes. Don't just believe what you read on social media or what you see on, it's not TikTok, what is it, X or TikTok or Facebook or any of them. Go see what's really going on. Go have a conversation with those people that you want to complain about. Yeah. And you'll find a lot more in common than you think.
And it's getting worse and worse too. I am of the mindset I would go back to late 80s, early 90s before social media tomorrow. And I own a company that relies on tech, but I'd get rid of it tomorrow and go find something else to do. I'd go back to farming or whatever. I don't think it's been good for us. We have, I think our founding fathers, if they came forward and we showed them one of these things, they would be fascinated. They, wow, you have all the knowledge in the world at your hands. So how has your life changed? What are you doing? And then they start showing them TikTok videos. And I think they'd be rolling over in their grave. You have access to all the knowledge in the world. And this is what you're using it for. You're using it for to gripe and complain and to watch videos and porn. And I think they would think it was the destruction of our world.
Well, I would agree. And I would agree that, as far as a moral foundation, you have to be really, really careful with it. And it breaks my heart when you go places, you see people walking down the street, like this. And you think, now, how are they navigating that? Not going to run into somebody or get run over. Or you go into a restaurant and there's a family there and all the members of the family are sitting there looking at their phone. Or kids that can't go to sleep at night unless, they have the phone in front. And adults, it's not just children, it's adults. How many millions, and I would dare say millions of hours are spent looking at that phone, seeing nothing that's really going to make your life a better place to be. I think our children have depression issues and suicide issues because of what they see on there. I forget who it was they were talking about it. It was on a podcast I watched. Maybe it'll come to me in a few minutes. But he said, when you look at social media and you look at Instagram, TikTok, whatever it is, people are always in their best fake day, their best day, fake day ever. And you live in the real world in your mind, and you see that, and then you start to think, well, why can't I be like that? Why can't I always be happy like that? Why can't I wear designer clothes and carry fancy handbags, or have the best motorcycle, or drive the nicest truck or car, or live in a big house with a pool, or all of the Kardashian stuff? And not, I've never actually watched them. I just hear people talk about them.
Finally, somebody else.
Yeah, I never have, but it started long before the phone, because, we had glamour magazines and we had daytime soap operas, and it just presented a very unrealistic type of lifestyle. But when you watch that hour after hour after hour after hour, it has an impact on your psyche.
It does. It does. And there's, I just, a couple of days ago, I was watching a video. I like to use YouTube instead of watching the Kardashians. I use it for documentaries and education and things like that. I'm a geek. I'm a nerd. I love just digging into stuff. But he made a good point. He says there's three different lives that people have. You have the outside, what you're talking about, what we show everybody. This is the Shane that the world knows of me, because it's always going to be presented in the best light you can to everybody. Mm-hmm. But then you have the kind of that real you, the one that your closest friends and everybody know. But then there's the third one. And that's the one that maybe nobody knows, or maybe only one other person. And that's where shame lives. The things that you're ashamed of that you've done in life, or that's going on in your life. And they may not even be bad things, but to you they are. And that gets internalized. And that's all we see is out there. We see everybody is just, it seems like, and I think that's why we have so much depression and suicide is because you're comparing yourself to the life that everybody presents. And it seems like nobody has those other things, the shame, the hardships, the things that you don't want anybody to know about going on. And the reality is we all do.
Mm-hmm. We all do. There's not a one of us that doesn't. And it's interesting. I studied psychology. I don't have a degree or anything, but I did study it at Boise State and at Utah State a little bit. And then even though I didn't continue my studies at a university, I continued to study. And then at one point I studied hypnosis, not the kind, where the guy goes up on the stage and gets you to act like a donkey or something like that. It's not that, not the stage stuff, because it is a really viable tool to help people. And I actually got, I was certified in that. And the things that our subconscious mind internalizes, it might just be a real flip statement that someone makes towards you when you're standing in the checkout line at the grocery store. But then your mind internalizes that and makes a file on that and holds on to that. And then your subconscious mind drives your consciousness to make that a truth in your life. And so, and especially when we're children, you can, a girl or a young man can walk past a plate glass window downtown and just glance over at themselves. And how the glass kind of distorts things. And you see this person that looks, we would call it body dysphoria, I guess. You look bigger than you really are. But then your mind internalizes that. And when not just our youth, but when we are being fed, like you just said, a constant stream of, well, this is the perfect world and I don't measure up to that, it's hard on our soul.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's another program. They say that is a survival instinct that goes back to the days when we had to, run away from the wolves and the bears, and everybody lived out in the wild. We didn't have the protections that we have today, and that our mind focuses most of its attention on negative things so that it can recognize danger and get away from it. And you actually have to program yourself to recognize the positive things. Well, we will remember 80% of the negative if you look back in your life. And the things around you and the people around you, you'll remember 80% of the negative stuff and only about 20% of the good stuff. And unless you actually force yourself to really think about it and go back, which is which is scary if you really think
It is
about that. But it's
scary.
also why it's such a negative world out there.
It is, and there are studies that have been conducted, and I found this absolutely fascinating, that your mind can't tell the difference between what's real and what isn't when you replace. And I think this
Mm.
touches on PTSD a little bit too, but there have been studies shown, where they put all the monitors on a person's body, to tell what your parasympathetic nervous system's doing, your heart rate, your blood pressure, all of that stuff, and on all of those things that happen when that survival system, and it's just a natural thing, just kicks in, like your stomach shuts down, and the blood goes from your extremities into your core, so that if you get hurt, you don't bleed out as fast. And what they did is they took and like threw a ball at somebody and monitored all those effects that their body had. Then they had them close their eyes and imagine that that same ball was being thrown at them. And their body, to a large extent, had those same parasympathetic responses. And I thought that was pretty interesting, that, the power of our mind and the control. I hate to use the word control, but I guess it does have, you've heard that saying, our own mind is a dangerous place to live. And so it's important, and I know this is probably not a political topic, except I think it is in today's world.
It is.
It's important to feed ourselves positive stuff, read our scriptures, listen to good, clean Christian music, associate with people who will lift you up,
Yeah.
and not put you down.
That's just it. I was fortunate. I met my biological father when I was 18. First of all, I was raised in a Baptist church, so I was raised around the scripture. I was raised in a good church. But then, as a young adult, I met my biological father, who started turning me on to more motivational speakers. Some of the most influential people in my life came out of books and on cassette tapes. But I was looking at that instead of the TV. And I think that had a great impact on my life, on why I just have a positive outlook. And Rhonda made the comment just yesterday. She said, when everything's going crazy around you, you just go calm. And it really is the truth. It's in an emergency situation, I just go calm and I just logically think my way through it, instead of just getting frantic and going, oh my gosh, the sky's falling, everything's going to fall apart, we're dead, everything's gone. I go, okay, hold on a minute. Let's just think our way through it and go through it. But it was because of that influence. I just have a positive outlook on life. It was Zig Ziglar made a comment about, if
Oh,
you're,
yeah.
yeah, I love Zig. He's probably one of my earliest and first. But he made a comment about, if you were on an island, he said, and you had your heart stopped, and the guy sitting next to you, there's a couple different responses. Oh my gosh, we're on a desert island, you're just going to die. Or he says, no, I need to cut you open. I saw this. I'm going to cut you open. I'm going to do this, this, and this, and this. I'm going to fix you and get you patched back up. At least you have some hope. He goes, I may not be able to do it, but you're going to feel a lot better. It's
At
kind
least
of a
you
good
stand
point.
a chance, right?
Yeah. So moving into a little bit more of the political side of things, I've got some notes that I wrote down here. In a recent Substack, you have a Substack, and it's that you use quite a bit, which is wonderful. But you had one that you discussed how California's green energy mandates are affecting Idaho's energy market, leading to higher costs for Idahoans. Can we talk about that a little bit, and what steps do we need to take to address that and fix that as a legislator?
Well, I'm not sure how we're going to fix it as a legislator, because the rates are set by the Public Utilities Commission, and that's a commission that's appointed by the executive branch. And
Oh,
so
yeah.
I think I think the important thing for people to do is to be aware. And again, it comes down to not just sitting there complaining about it, but actually go to the Public Utilities Commission meetings and listen to them and contact them and study and understand, how this all works and how these rates are set. Because, I remember when they started putting in the windmills, and they said, oh, well, the windmills and the solar, this is going to save Idahoans this much money, and your power bill is going to go down. Your rates will decrease because we'll have all this clean, efficient energy. And for most people, and most of the messages that I get from constituents and people around the state of Idaho, that's just simply not the case. Our rates are going up, and we're not seeing an end to that. And then to send that power to California like that, when we need it in Idaho. And now that we have all these data centers going in, we're going to need a lot more. And I'm a Sean Ryan podcast fan because he has really interesting people on there. In fact, one of his guests in a recent show owns Rainmaker Incorporated, and he talked about, and Idaho was mentioned quite a lot on that podcast, and about how how they make the clouds rain and what they put in it, and he addressed his opinion on chemtrails and things that he thought were probably issues that we should be focusing on as a country. But back to your question, that's what we have to do. We have to put pressure on these bureaucratic agencies and the executive branch, to let them know that we're not happy with this, and we need to stand up and take accountability for ourselves and the actions that are being taken around us. And other, I really honestly, as far as the legislature, we can legislate, but bottom line is those decisions come from that board and that executive branch.
Yeah. So for those who haven't read the Substack and dug in, and that was one of them that I've gone in and read. You were talking a little bit about how it's our relationship, and I can't remember help me out, the group that we're in that is setting those rates and setting that we have to. It's like something about the carbon offsets or something there that's causing our rates to go up. Can you dig into just a little bit more,
Well,
refresh my memory, because it has
carbon
been a little
tax.
bit. Yeah.
Well, and we will do a Substack to clarify that more. We're going to do more. The Gang of, anything that comes out with the Gang of Eight pictures on it, that's something that we've all worked on together and that we all present together. So the carbon tax thing, thanks for putting that picture up. The carbon tax thing, and I am not 100% clear on how that all works, other than industry has to conduct itself in such a way that it lowers its carbon emission, but they can buy the credits. And the windmill program is one of the places where they can buy the credits to offset emissions that their businesses or their industries make. And that's federal. That's not state.
And it's because California has mandated it over there. It's affecting us in Idaho and our power because we are selling power back over to them, and we're attached into that group somehow.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's affecting us on it. And I didn't have a chance to really dig in deep on it. It's ridiculous that this is the problem. We have hidroelectric power here in Idaho. We ought to have extremely low and cheap and efficient power that isn't adding carbon. I mean,
but I don't believe that hydropower is on the green energy list.
See, that's just ridiculous.
And it is ridiculous.
That's insane.
And Idaho we have the resources, the power that could come from hydroelectric power in the state of Idaho. I think it's endless, because the rivers always flow, and they have these low profile turbines that they can put in water, and it doesn't take a whole lot of water to put them in, and have them generate electricity. They're clean, they're efficient, there's no impact on the environment. You don't even see that they're there for the most part. They don't bother anybody. They're quiet. And there's absolutely no excuse for that to not being used, except a previous administration on the federal level, several back, decided that this was the thing we were going to do. And everybody jumped on board. And I believe it's being driven a lot because of the carbon credits. I really believe that. I think John Deere Finance is one of the biggest companies that manage, broker, and move these carbon credits around. Someone told me that. Now, don't quote me. I probably shouldn't have said it because I don't have the proof right here in my hand. But a lot of these big businesses, probably even BlackRock and Vanguard, deal in those carbon credits and move them and trade them around, so that these companies are in compliance.
So I've spent quite a bit of time looking at getting completely off grid. What I could do to get off grid, and did a lot of research, and solar will help you do that, but it's not even the panels. They degrade at such a high rate right now. They haven't they're making strides, but they degrade at such a high rate that what you pay for them still doesn't really pan out. They only work during the daytime when you have sunshine. If you have extremely cloudy days, it greatly affects the efficiency of them. And then you have to have the batteries, which they have to strip mine in order to get the batteries and the materials that they use for the solar. So it's terrible for the environment. And so if you're trying to get off grid, really, if you can find a place that has a waterfall, even some kind of a drop that's a long enough drop in elevation that you could put a turbine in, that is the most efficient, cost-effective, long-term solution for power. And we have it all over Idaho. Why are we doing windmills?
We have more rivers than any other state?
Yeah.
We have more rivers, I believe, than any other, or second most than any other state in the country. And I agree with you. So the windmills and the solar panels, the environmental impact of those, it doesn't end. You know, the cement pilings that you have to put in to support them, the animals that they kill, the chemicals that are used to clean them, the solar farms, you can't have weeds grow up in them. So I'm pretty confident they're probably using glyphosate, Roundup or atrazine or something like that will sterilize the ground to keep the weeds down in between them. What they do to the birds, the temperature changes in the environment around them, and who knows how far out that expands. The list of negatives just go on and on and on. But like you just said, the hydropower and why we are not developing that, and why the state of Idaho is not a leader in that, especially where we're going to need so much more power when Meta goes online and these other data centers that we're putting in. Power and water, that massive amounts of power and water to run those.
Not to mention every other source of energy. If you're doing nuclear, if you're doing coal, if you're doing natural gas, if you're doing solar, if you're doing windmills, they take up an enormous amount of land that is it doesn't benefit anybody. But when you put in a reservoir, I was just out on above the Twin Falls power plant yesterday, out on my kayak, looking at a kid standing on a dock staring at his phone.
But speaking of, sorry.
Yes, it blew my mind.
Look at the water. Look at the mountains.
we're paddling by, and they have three areas that they have these little docks that are floating out on the water. And his buddy is out on a jet ski, and he's over there standing in his swim trunks on his phone, waiting for his turn to get on the jet ski. And I just thought, how ridiculous. But that's beside the point. But it benefited. It created a recreational, something that we could go and enjoy, and something that the public can use. But all the rest of it takes away instead of giving us something back. And I just don't understand the mindset. I guess, that's just, I don't understand the leftist mindset anyway. So that's another story.
Yeah, and I don't either. And I don't understand leadership in the state of Idaho that won't stand up to this.
Well,
do you know what I mean? And I get that a lot of the areas that the windmills and stuff go on is BLM, but a lot of it's also private. And I get the money. I know some people who put a solar farm on their, it's not dry farm, because they do have some water up there that they can, but and he says, we get, I can't remember the exact dollar amount, $60,000 a year or something like that to rent, to have those up there. And, that's more than we would get from rent. And, it's every year and it's consistent and we don't have to worry about it. And I just looked at it and I said, so what happens when it comes time to clean that up? Oh, well, they have to do it in the company this. But if you look at how many solar panel companies and how many wind farm companies have gone bankrupt. Yeah, and I'm pretty sure, I don't know, I haven't dug into it, and this is something that I should probably dig into, but they go bankrupt, then they just move down the street and start a whole entire new company, but the assets from that company are protected, so that, if there's nothing there to go after, for the cleanup and replacement and stuff. And from what I understand, like you said about the solar panels, even if you put them on your house, by the time you get them paid for, people say, well, my power bill was only this and it was only that, but I'm making this big of a payment on my solar panels. I'm like, well, how does that compare to what your power bill was? And then by the time you finally get them, I think they finance them, one friend of mine that did it, it was a 20-year finance, if I remember right. Because by
Wow.
the time they get them financed and paid off, they're either outdated, wore out, broken, and then, like you said, by the time you put the batteries
Yeah.
and everything in, because
Or you're only getting
unless
about 50% of the power that you were when you first bought them, and that's the real problem, is that they degrade so much over time. That's we bought a 33-foot Thomas built school bus that we're converting into a home and putting, and solar will be something we put on it. It makes sense. You're mobile like that. It's a whole different thing. But that is one of the biggest concerns, is that they do degrade. So you have to change everything. You're really thinking about your energy efficiency of every appliance you put in it, how you're operating it, what you're doing in order to offset that. And we don't do that in our homes. If you want to go buy technology, you just go buy it. If you want to have an 85-inch TV, you don't think about how much power that TV is going to use when you put it in there. You just go buy it. Nobody
Oh, and
thinks
I'm
about the
shocked at
cost.
how much power the TV does use.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
a lot.
How much, I'm just like,
Yeah.
I never dreamed, because growing up when the dinosaurs roamed the earth, the TVs just were not that big a deal and they just didn't use that much. But they do, they really do. And those are things you have to think about. You know, this generation, they're not the original, what would you call it, environmentalists, because when I graduated from high school, my dream was always to build one of those houses that kind of went back in the mountain, and then had the glass walls and all the tile and clay and stuff that held the heat, so that even in
Mm.
the winter you had enough ambient heat storage just in your facility, just in your
Called
home,
a space home, isn't that what they call it?
but
Something like
warm.
that.
Well, there were geodesic designs, and they might have been called that. But, the passive solar makes sense. The active solar, I'm not seeing how that
Yeah,
makes sense.
not so
And where are
much.
you going to throw it away? What do you do with all that stuff when you're done with it? And like you said, the rare earth minerals and the way they have to mine what it takes to make it all work.
If you're buying solar to save money, it's probably not going to pencil out. If you're buying it, however, it does make sense if you're buying it as a backup if the grid goes down, or to be, self-efficiency, those types of things.
Mhm.
That's where it does make sense. You just have to have the right mindset when you go into it, understanding what it is that you're truly doing when you go that direction. And
Yeah.
I looked
So
into.
I heard Glenn Beck make the statement once, his ranch there in down by Preston. He said that, they have solar and they have the generators, his goal was to be totally self-sufficient. But he said that with the solar, he said, better be ready that when the sun goes down, you're done doing everything you're going to do for the day, because when the sun goes down, you're done.
Yeah, that's
Which
that's
is
very
how
true.
we lived 100 years, or maybe a little over 100 years ago now. We worked until the sun went down and then we were done.
Yeah, and I think we'll catch up. I think we'll get there eventually. I'm not anti-solar.
Me
I'm
either.
anti stupid decisions, and walking into
That would
things
be
not knowing
it.
what you're getting into.
Exactly.
So you mentioned cloud seeding, which is interesting because I have that was another one of your Substacks. You were questioning its effectiveness and environmental impact, and so what? Talk to us a little bit about that. I mean, this used to be the great conspiracy theorist that you were truly tinfoil cap if you were talking about cloud seeding, and now we see states like Florida that are banning it. So let's look a little bit more into that.
Well, and it's interesting that I did get to listen to his company's called Rainmaker. Actually, he's 25 years old, but it's one of the largest cloud seeding companies, the way I understand it, in the country. And he was talking about what they use in their cloud seeding and the materials that they use it. And what I found even more fascinating was he mentioned Idaho several times. So and forgive me if I have the dates wrong, but what I remember, because it caught me off guard when he started to talk about this. So then I set stuff down and paid a little bit more attention. But cloud seeding began, I think he said, in 1947. And so the question is how effective is it, and how do we measure that? And he said it wasn't until 1973 that they were really able to measure, because I think, was it Doppler radar or something like that? They were able to really tell, if the clouds were becoming heavy because of what they were putting into them, and were they really putting down more rain because of what they had done. And he said Idaho was actually the state where they were first able to measure whether the cloud seeding was effective or not. So I think it depends on what they use to seed the clouds and how they go about it. He talked about, wind and dirt and dry places, and how, the wind actually blows those particulates into the air, and cloud seeding, pretty much just mimics that to put particulates into the clouds to make them rain. I think the challenge that we have here is that anything that can start out good can also be used for nefarious purposes. And I'm not saying that's what's happening. I just think that we need to be really aware. And that's why we did the Substack on it, was because there's so much talk about it now. And, what are we really doing? What are we really using? What are we putting into the clouds?
Yeah.
There's the theory that I can't remember if it's in the Substack. I don't think it is. The theory that there's an aluminum-based product that they put in the clouds to get them to rain, and then that falls on the forest areas, and then it makes the trees so that they burn more and stuff like that. We need to know, and people deserve to know what's being put into the atmosphere and what's being used for these products. If it's an inert material, okay, fine. But it shouldn't be done clandestine. It should be done so that we know what's happening, and we know the effects, and we know the future of it, and we know where it's going.
And I want to correct myself. As soon as I shut up for a second, you were talking about, no, it's not cloud seeding that they banned in Florida. It was the weather modification spraying that they're doing in the atmosphere that they banned, having to do more with the chemtrails and that side of things. But it is interesting that talking about whether they really truly know how effective it is or not, because this goes all the way back. They were trying to figure out. This was down in the Gulf region, I believe. They were trying to find out if they could modify and lessen or stop the devastating effects of hurricanes. And so they went in and they were seeding the hurricane with the idea of trying to modify that. And they realized after all of this money was spent, all of these times going in there doing what they were doing, sometimes it seemed like it worked, sometimes it seemed like it didn't. And the big question that came up, and the reason they decided to stop doing it, was public pressure, because they thought that they had made a hurricane worse. And it just devastated, but they weren't really sure about that either. But the second was that they just couldn't prove its effectiveness. They didn't know if it would have just got smaller anyway. Same thing with the cloud seeding. They don't know if it would have just dumped the rain on us anyway, because it's just weather is bigger than we are, and we just need to accept it for what that is and stop tinkering with it and stop messing with it.
Well, I would agree with you there. We talk about global warming, and we talk about man's carbon footprint and all of this stuff. But I think sometimes what comes from that is there are people who are born, live their whole entire life, and never leave like a mile square area from where they were actually born. They don't know how, and it's not their fault. It's not a fault.
Yeah.
It's just because that's the life they've lived. They don't know that you can drive down through New Mexico and there's mile after mile after mile after mile of nothing. Or, places in Utah where there's nothing but desert, places in Idaho. People don't understand, just, at least in the United States, just how sparse the population of people per square foot of dirt really is. And so, we've been able to, do we need to be careful? Yes. Do we need to be good stewards of what we have? Absolutely. And when we farmed, we were that way. We were careful about chemicals. We put stuff into the dirt that would build the soil, rather than to just mine out of it, whatever, with just straight nitrogen-based products. Because we knew that if we took care of our dirt, it would take care of us. And I do believe that we have a stewardship to take care of what God has blessed us with. Can we cause a lot of this stuff? I had a Time magazine kicking around here from 1973, I think it was, and it talked about the upcoming ice age. How in X many years, it's going to be too cold to live here, and stuff like that. Do we have an impact? Yes. Do we have that massive of an impact?
Yeah.
I'm not,
I can think of
I have to wonder.
yeah, and I can think of a dozen great reasons to reduce emissions out of cars. You just drive over to Boise right now, and as you start dropping into that valley, you can see the smog in the air. And I have allergies and I don't have asthma, fortunately, but I have family members that do, and I know how much that affects them. I know on bad days when there was an inversion, how bad I just flared up and my eyes would itch and everything else, and it's harder to breathe. There's a lot of reasons to that are sensible and that are exact to say, hey, maybe we shouldn't be blowing so much garbage up into the air because it does affect everybody around us, without getting into the big bad, climate warming, climate freezing. All of that just happens. It's cyclical. I remember it's just in my 51 years on this planet, I've seen the cycles. I've seen snow that was up to rooftops and drifting, and then I've seen the snow go down to where there's almost nothing on the ground, enough to make a footprint that summer or winter. and so there's a lot of other reasons that we have to be good stewards. I get that, but coming into the government and making us pay a whole lot more money in Idaho for power because California has decided that they need to reduce climate change. That's just bogus.
It is. It really is. And there was something I was going to add to that, and now it just kind of left me. So maybe it will come back here in a minute.
I hate
maybe.
that.
20 minutes after we shut this down, I'm going to be like, oh yeah, that was so important that I wanted to share it.
That's what. So put a pin in that, and if it comes back up, we'll bring it right back around. So let's I've got my notes, and I try to do something today that I never do. I hate doing that. I'm more of I just like going off the cuff. Tell me a little bit about what you have seen as a legislator and some of the concerns that you have, and some of the biggest things that you've seen in this last legislative session that you think that could have gone better, or that maybe went great. Let's just talk about that a little bit.
Well, I think there were some good things that happened in this last legislative session. There always is. We got some small tax cuts and some things like that, but now we're finding out that our budget forecast was maybe estimated a little bit high and things aren't coming in quite like they would. I think the thing that bothered me the most about this legislative session is there were a lot of bills that were put through and became law that didn't really do anything. They were just virtue signaling bills. And for me, I believe that it's my job as a legislature to do two basic things. Number one is I have a very sacred fiduciary responsibility to make sure that tax dollars are spent well, so that the burden on the people of the state is as absolutely low as it can be. Everybody has a really good idea for something. Everybody has a pet project that would be a great idea, and we've got to take care of the people, and it's our job to make sure that everybody's life is as good as it can be. Well, it's our job to make sure that everybody's life is as good as it can be by not taxing them into a position where all they can do is work to meet their obligations. So my thing is the fiduciary responsibility to our people. The second one is to defend and protect our God-given rights, that God gave us and are defended by our Constitution. To me, those are the two things that I'm there as a legislature to do. And you saw the Gang of Eight. We made that pledge to each other and to our constituents and the people of the state that we wouldn't vote for anything that had federal dollars. We wouldn't vote for anything. We would vote for the maintenance budgets because we were told there would be a maintenance budget that would keep the lights on, that would be what last year's budget was. And I think we'd add in a cost of living increase, and I can't remember what else now. And then there would be enhancement budgets that would come through for extras, like new cars or new desks or new computers or new software or whatever. It wasn't real, but addition to things that didn't just keep the lights on. So we voted for all of those maintenance budgets. I think there might have been one or two that we didn't, but we voted for most of the maintenance budgets. Then when these enhancement budgets start coming through, it's, well, we have to have this. We have to do this. We have to spend this money on this. We have to, well, if this was something that we had to spend the money on, why wasn't it part of the maintenance budget?
Yeah.
And then we find out that, like, this, I've always taken great pride in not voting for the Lava Hot Springs funding, because I think that that's something that government should not be involved in. And I honestly shut my phone and everything down, Shane, so that you wouldn't hear the little dings. I'm sorry, if we do this again, I'm going to have to figure out what's going on here. But anyway, the Lava Hot Springs budget did never come through. And I don't vote against it because I don't like it. I vote against it because I think that's something that private industry could do. Some family somewhere could make some money, take care of their family, be industrious, if that's what they do. And I don't think that government should ever be involved in something that private industry can do. Well, then we find out that now there are what we're terming ongoing spending. And I haven't really had a chance to look into that to find out just how much ongoing spending we really have and how many things are being paid for that the legislature isn't actually looking at and reviewing every year. And I stuff like that really worries me, because you need to be able to live, and you need to be able to, your work should be, and I'm all in favor of work. I think that everybody should work, because I like that saying, where God gives every bird its seed, but he doesn't throw it in their nest. That's one of my favorite sayings. But at the same time, we shouldn't be taxed to the point that that's all we do to meet all of these social obligations. Communities, churches, neighbors, families, that's where a lot of this stuff should come from. So I think we saw quite a little bit of virtue signaling bills this year. And this is something that's bothered me for a long time. There were laws passed without an enforcement mechanism. And that's kind of taken a really ugly turn in our state.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff like that shouldn't happen. And people say, well, no one would vote for it if it had an enforcement mechanism.
Okay.
Oh, fine.
Then fine. Yeah, what good does it do to vote for it if it doesn't?
Right, because now all it's done is it's caused a problem.
I think on a bigger scale, the problem with that is, I say, fine, run it up the flagpole. Put it out there. If it's a good bill, if it's something that should be done, put it out there with the enforcement mechanism and everything in place, because then it will shine a light on the people who vote against it, because there's actually teeth in it.
Well, do that, Shane, because they want to get along. They want a seat at the table. They don't want to make leadership mad so that they can get all these bills through that they want done. The personal pet project gets done. And that's not why we're there. I'm not there to have a seat at the table. I'm there to represent you. I'm there to represent Legislative District 8 and the rest of the people of the state. That's my job. My job is to make sure that the stuff that comes out of that building doesn't have unintended consequences. Who does it help and who does it hurt? Why are we doing it? Is it constitutional? Is it the proper role of government? And those are tough questions, but if they're not, we shouldn't be doing them.
Yeah.
I don't even remember, 700 bills were written, 700 pieces of legislation, I think, or maybe even more. Maybe there were 405, close to 500 in the House, and I can't remember how many now in the Senate. In theory, more than almost any other legislative session. Maybe not the most, but close to the most. And why? I mean,
that's insane. What's the
purpose here?
Yeah. Were there really that many things that are necessary to keep the doors open in Idaho? I mean, you got your gotta do's and you got your wanna do's. And I think the wanna do's should be left to the private sector, and the gotta do's should be left to the government. And that's
absolutely agree.
There's so many pet projects, and that's why our taxes are so high. That's why people are having a hard time paying their bills. That's why some families are feel the necessity for welfare, because anytime government gets involved, they screw it up so bad that we can't afford to live.
Right. And I'm of the opinion that for the most part, and somebody can always bring me an example to prove to me that I'm wrong. For the most part, people are smart and you know how to take care of yourself. And we are responsible human beings if we're put in a position where we can be. But we all know that the more you do for someone and the more of that responsibility you take away, the less responsible. It's easier to be less responsible. Let me put it that way. And if you really ask yourself the hard question, and I love this, and I heard it from Vivek Ramaswamy last year when I was in DC at a conference, and he said, the only difference between a liberal nanny state and a conservative nanny state is whose idea it is. And I love that.
Great statement.
Absolutely, because that boils everything that we've talked about today. It puts it right there. That's exactly what it is. If I'm a conservative and it's my idea, then it's not a nanny state. But it's still conservative nanny state when the government thinks they need to keep doing more and more and more for the people at the cost of their happiness and their ability to make a living and take care of themselves.
It used to be that we had the mindset of how can we do this without getting the government involved? So here's some great ideas. For example, when I was in elementary school, I still remember collecting the flaps off of cereal boxes and bringing them in with the goal to get, because if you got enough of those, then the school would give you so many points that they'd use to buy things like books, for the library. And it was a wonderful thing, because then now the public sector was involved in helping to fund some of the things that the schools wanted. You could help with sports, you could help with sports equipment, you could help with all of these wonderful extracurricular things, because the community got involved in funding it, not the government. The community did. And what if we had the mindset of every time that there was something that came before the legislators, they looked at it and said, okay, is this important enough that we ought to be talking about it? Actually, A should be, do we have the constitutional right to even be talking about it? I think that ought to be the first question. Second question ought to be, okay, so we have the constitutional right to talk about this. Is it important enough to talk about? And then C, okay, it's important enough to talk about. So is there a way that we can do this without writing a law?
I agree. And there are some of us who think that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, there really are. Just like the federal dollars. That was the other thing we pledged to not do was, and I did that before, especially with the ARPA and the COVID money, because you get those federal dollars and they all have strings. No federal money comes into this state without you having to meet some sort of requirement, jump through some hoop, or comply to what they want. And we saw that with the bathroom situation. I had a gal call me. I wasn't even in office. She called me from, I think it was the Nampa School District, and she said there's this, I can't remember if it was a boy or a girl that wants to go into the opposite bathroom and use the bathroom, and it was causing a bunch of problems. So I looked into it. Well, that was a federal mandate under the Biden administration that, anybody could use whatever bathroom they wanted, and if that was violated, they would lose school lunch funding. Well, the school lunch funding is a United States Department of Agriculture program. So if the school doesn't jump through their hoops, obey their rules, and follow the things that the federal government wants them to do, then they don't get the school lunch funding. And it just, 43%, maybe it's more now, but 43% of our state budget comes from the feds. So that means that if you look at our sovereignty, say at 100%, I don't know how to visualize this, so if I'm off the mark here, you can help me with this. But let's just say our state sovereignty is 100%. If 43% of our budget comes from the feds, then that's how much of our state sovereignty we've already lost. Because we take that federal money.
There's a really easy way to explain that. If 43% of your budget in your own personal life, let's say my ability to pay for my house, my ability to pay for my car, my ability to pay for my food, my ability to pay for clothing, heat, utilities, all the things that I needed, were coming from a friend, even a friend who has your best interests in mind. And the federal government doesn't have your best interests in mind, but even a friend, how much would that affect your life? How much influence would they have over your actions? Hey, you know what, Shane, I'm paying for all of this, but you're not showing up to help me with this. If you don't show up to help me with this, I'm not going to keep giving you money.
Exactly. And even if that friend didn't do that, that friend would have the ability to control you. That is an excellent example.
It would be. And as much as I trust my friends, I'm not going to give them that power over my purse. I'm not going to give them that power over my life. Now imagine that it's somebody who just wants power and control. And that when you're talking about the federal government having that much control over Idaho, it's not the federal government. It's not this entity over there. It's California. It's New York. It's the large population centers that have the large voter bases. And those are the people that are controlling your life. So in Idaho, we have people moving here to get out of California's influence. Oh no, they still have that influence because we're getting the money from the federal government and they have the large voter bases. And so therefore they have that much more control over the federal government. And that means that they have that much control over Idaho.
It's the federal bureaucratic agencies, because the president, Congress, nobody can know what happens inside of every one of those bureaucratic agencies. And that system has gotten huge. You know, we saw it in the first Trump administration. I talked to someone who actually worked for him, and he said it took him a couple of years to figure out that the problem was the bureaucratic agencies. He said, but by the time we figured it out, there wasn't enough time in the 2 years that were left in his term to fix it. They had started on it, but they weren't able to fix it. But if you think of the thousands of bureaucratic agencies and the thousands, possibly millions of decisions that are made every day by these people who are bureaucrats, who are supposed to be executing the laws that Congress passes, but where is the oversight to make sure that every little thing that they do or say or make happens is in compliance with a law that's been passed? Then you stop and look at the laws that are passed, and then you know that, you know, this is not going to bode well for the American citizens or the states. It's out of control. It's just out, I think it's just out of control.
Don't quote me on this. I am 99% positive that I'm remembering this right when I dug into it. But we're talking about some of the bathroom bills. Those rules were part of what was the federal government's control over the school lunch program. Were tied to some of those things that we saw with the boys being able to travel with the girls to go and stay in the same rooms with them when they went out on sporting events that were out of town, and some of the bathroom stuff. I believe that part of that was tied back to that federal funding of the school lunch program, wasn't it? I don't know if you...
That's the way I understand it, that, you know, that's why the schools themselves, you could shut it down. You know, you could not do it. You could make sure that your bathrooms were either boys or girls, but then you would lose that school lunch funding. And that's just one example of how many thousands in our life.
Yeah. And just one.
How many times a day do we come across that? How many times a day do we, even on a state level? So how many times a day do you go to do something and well, you have to have a permit for that, or you have to talk to this entity, or you have to fill out a form for this, or it's just never ending. And the regulatory burden on people, it's just too much.
I'm looking in the comments, and Maria Nate, hi Maria, she's out there in the watching this right now. She said, yes, funding would be reduced to schools if they didn't comply with federal bathroom policy. So there you have it. And that's
so good. She's so good too. She's on top of stuff like nobody I've ever seen. Thank you, Maria.
Yeah, another person out there that's talking a little bit is Representative Zeiderfeld. She said our Constitutional Republic is only for a well-informed public, and that's why they keep a lot of important information out of the public. Very strong point. Ray Hubbard. Good point. He said, now, I think he was referring to the comment about your friend and the finances. He said, now apply that same example to the federal land in Idaho, and we see that going on right now.
Mm-hmm. So, well, it is 63% of our, I've got to let my dog out just a second, and then I'll finish that thought.
Oh. This is the fun of doing this when we're at home and
Well, we made it
we're able
an
to do
hour.
this. We
So,
did. We
but
made it an hour.
she's
So
past her hour.
yeah, on
So
on
what
that
were we?
note, I was just about to say we probably are getting close here and need to wrap up a little bit. But what I
Okay.
want to do is give you the last little bit here. What do you want to say to the person watching this right now, as a senator? What is the kind of the most important thing coming up in this next legislative session? What do you think the voter needs to know, and how can they help you accomplish the tasks that need to be accomplished coming into the next session?
Well, I think one of the most important things that they need to know is for me, this budget thing is huge because we get to pay the bill for it. And I think that you need to pay attention to what's going on. We're going to continue to put out Substacks. When we get in the legislative session, hopefully we can put out more than one a week so that you're aware of what's going on. If you don't live in one of our legislative districts, you need to make sure that your legislators know that you're watching what's going on. That accountability from the people who vote for you is huge when you're a legislator, because there's that saying that, the only political pain that an elected official feels is the threat of losing the next election. And that makes a lot of people think a lot different. But when they get comfortable and they're in there and, I'm good, I'm in there, nothing's going to happen, I'll serve until I either die or decide to leave. That's not a good place to be, in my mind, for the people in that legislative district. So pay attention to that. I think I'm not sure what's going to happen with this sell off of the federal land thing. I don't know where that's going to go. Constitutionally, if you look at it, and I'll challenge people to look at this, read the Constitution of the United States and see what it says about the federal government controlling land. Do I think that, and I'm just not going to comment anymore on that. I'll just leave that there because there's a wide variety of opinions on that. But look at the Constitution, because that's what's important is, what is the civil agreement in the Constitution that we agreed to when we did that? Just be aware, be aware of where the money's being spent. Be aware of legislation that's going to come through that will infringe on your rights, even though it's a really good idea and it's going to protect somebody and look out for somebody. What are the unintended consequences? And know that when you have good legislators that you know about, this next year is an election year, they're going to need your support, because your good legislators, they are going to face a real uphill challenge. There are those who do not want to see them in office that are going to come after them hard, and they're going to spend a lot of money to make sure that they don't stay in those positions. So, our good people are going to need your financial support. They're going to need you to talk to your friends and neighbors and let them know that you support them. And, that's the most important thing, because for whatever reason, really good conservatives, and I think it's because people who are conservative are busy working, paying their taxes, raising their families, and they don't necessarily have all this liquid resource to put into these campaigns. But it takes more than money. Door knocking, passing out flyers, making phone calls, reminding people to go vote, loading your car up with people and taking them to the polling places on election day, putting a sign in your yard. There's so many things you can do to support good, solid conservatives. And so I would just encourage everybody to do that. And, if you have any questions, my personal email's out there, Zito for Idaho at protonmail.com. Email me your questions and I'll do my best to get answers for them. If you just, whatever it takes, we just need to hold the line. We've got at least 8 good legislators. There are more out there that really want to hold the line and be accountable. We're not looking for a seat at the table. We need to support them and get them back in office.
Those are all good points. I want to bring up really quick. So the Substack for Christy, if you're out there and you're wanting to see that, let me get the window pulled up for you right now. If you're not familiar with Substack, it's just where they have a place to go in and post articles. And it's a way that some of our legislators are using to communicate with you, the voter. If you want to stay informed and know what's going on, this is a great place to do it. I'm going to try to bring this up just a little bit larger so you can see some of the things that that's on Christy's Substack. You just go to Zito for Idaho, Zito for FOR Idaho .substack.com, and she has some wonderful articles. Some of those come from her, some of those come from the so-called Gang of Eight. Those are your 8 great legislators. I would personally endorse every one of them in there, and you can just learn about some of the subjects that we've talked about today, as a matter of fact. Then also, I encourage you to go over to ZitoForIdaho.com. This is where you can donate, and also you can go in and click on volunteer and communicate that you want to volunteers, you want to get involved so that you can help them with their campaign. It's going to be a nasty one this come around. We've already seen it. We see some of the things going out. Even one of the legislators that we were able to get rid of over here in the Magic Valley has now decided that she's just going to dig in and do the tour. She's got her nose in the middle of all of it. So and there's a lot of smear campaigns going on right now. So you've got to get informed. You got to find out where the truth is, and we really desperately, and I'm saying collectively as Idaho citizens that want to keep a conservative Idaho, desperately need to get involved as both with your money. Okay. It's going to take money. Yeah. No matter how much boots on the ground,
unfortunately, it just does.
It's going to take money. And maybe skip that trip out to, I know you're going to call me a heathen for saying this, but maybe you skip that trip over to the Texas Roadhouse this week and take that money instead and donate it to one of your legislators that are running one of your candidates. But we're going to have to do things like that. It's going to take sacrifice, and it's a small sacrifice for you, maybe to give up that meal that you went to eat out and instead eat at home. But it's a bigger sacrifice if you don't, because the wrong people get in office.
Freedom is not free.
That's right.
And freedom is not free. No matter how you look at it, it just doesn't. And it takes blood, sweat, and tears in battle to keep us free.
Yep.
And you need to choose your warriors. Don't, like we talked before, don't believe everything you hear on social media. Go to the source. Ask that person that's being screamed about. Is this really what it is? What's really going on here? Sometimes people can serve long enough in the legislature that they forgot why they were there in the beginning. And they start in this, we're going to have a seat at the table. But what do they compromise to get that seat at the table? And so, know your candidates, watch what they're doing. And just because that's the racehorse that you voted for in the past, that doesn't mean that that's the horse that you should vote for now.
That's right.
It's hard to stay consistent. It's hard to be there and not buy into that social pressure of, well, gosh, I might get this bill through if I promise to vote for this, even though it's probably not the best thing, but then I can go home and I can tell my constituents I was able to do this. No, our job is to vote right. Our job is to vote right on what is there. Like we said before, do we really need 800 bills or even 400 pieces of legislation going into law every year?
I want to say there were something like 1,400 bills that were originally presented, but then about 680, 690, something like that, 700 bills that made it out of committee into the floor for debate. That then those got voted. I can't. It was ridiculous high number. If you want a smaller government, you want to get rid of that kind of stuff. We need more people like Christy in there. And we need more people like Ganita and the Gang of Eight. So get involved. And I'll tell you this, it seems scary to get involved in something you've never done before. But once you get in there, you start finding out that you have more people that think like you. And you learn in a hurry that most people think like you. That most people want a smaller government. Most people don't want more government. Even on the left, this is the goofy thing. What they want is the right to go live their life the way that they want to live. But their solution for that is to make government force you to live the same way that they want to live. Where on our side, we believe that everybody ought to be able to live their life the way they want to live. And the answer for that is just let everybody live the way they want to live. And so, but everybody truly wants to live their life their way. And the answer for that is that we have to have a smaller government and we have to have less government involvement in our lives. And the way to make that happen is get involved. Get involved in government so that you can keep it the way that you want it, smaller and out of your life. And so you're going to have, if you want to keep it that way, you're going to have to become a part of the solution, because if you don't, somebody else will become a part of the problem and they will outweigh us. So get involved. Christy,
Right.
thank you so much for coming on here. It's, and
Thank
all,
you. And just one last
yeah, do.
thing. If you don't get involved, you don't get to complain.
Amen. That's right.
So I just want to say God bless to everybody. We live in the greatest country that's ever existed on the face of the earth, and let's do everything we can to keep it this way.
I will say this too, Christy, you've got grit. And that's what it takes. It takes somebody who can go in there, who can shoulder all of the criticism, who can shoulder the nastiness, who can just stay the course and stay in there and stick it out. And I know that's just a huge weight on your shoulder. So if you're not going to get involved with your money, and you're not going to get involved with your boots on the ground, maybe you just simply can't, you don't have, for health reasons or whatever, here's one thing you can do: pray. And these people need your prayers, and they need your emails. So thank you, Christy.
Thank you, Shane. Have a great day.